Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Iinuma. Our company is Strategic Systems Group. We are a Los Angeles-based IT consulting firm and experts in enterprise resource planning. I'm here with my friend and colleague, Mr. Eric Klauss, CEO of PartnerSource Solutions. The topic for today is Outgrowing QuickBooks. And we have done webinars and presentations and so forth along these lines. Maybe it's time to take a fresh look. The times have changed. Technology has become more modern. The alternatives might be endless, but maybe we can narrow them down a little bit. So how about first, Eric, why don't we start? Maybe some signs, right, that we have a client that has outgrown QuickBooks. One of the things that I often point to first is if they have lots of spreadsheets and maybe some manual processes, that's a pretty good indication that they've outgrown QuickBooks. Is that true?
Absolutely. I sometimes use the term islands of information, but this is what we see is a proliferation. Sorry, tripped over my own word there, but a proliferation of data that's existing outside of QuickBooks, because there isn't a place in QuickBooks for that data to go. That could be data from an e-commerce system. That could be manufacturing data. It could be inventory information in some organizations, because maybe standard QuickBooks inventory isn't really designed to handle the kinds of information that they're tracking. Things like serial numbers and lot numbers, for example. QuickBooks inventory really standard isn't set up to handle those kinds of things. So that's what we end up seeing is all of that data now is surrounding QuickBooks. But now the flip side to that is, if I'm a business manager, business owner, trying to get a handle on all of this information, right? Maybe I need pieces of this data to be able to make intelligent business decisions, and I don't have any easy way to report on that. I've got to go and try and pull it together, cobble it together, as you were saying, Brian, from some data that might exist in QuickBooks and some data that might exist in some spreadsheets, and maybe there's some other data that exists in a CRM system or some other spreadsheet somewhere. And so I don't have this view of all of this information. That makes it almost impossible for me to make intelligent business decisions on any kind of reasonable timeline basis, right? I'm going to spend potentially hours pulling all of this data together, and I'm probably not dealing with that on a daily basis. So any information that I have is also limited based on the last time window, if you will, the last snapshot that I pulled and cobbled all of that information together. So I think those are some of the challenges that we see for people who have been running QuickBooks maybe for a while. If you're brand new in a startup business, I often say that QuickBooks is great for a young business. But as the business grows, as the business becomes more successful, this is where we see the organizations begin to really struggle, and potentially also to struggle with the amount of data. That's another challenge, is depending upon the nature of the business, if there are large volumes of transactions, the underlying QuickBooks database is really not designed to handle a large volume of transactions. And so I often look at that as this is a great problem for a business to have, because in the beginning, when you were starting your business, you probably didn't have that issue, right? You were just hoping to get some orders. As you've become more successful as a business, now you're dealing with tens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of orders a day, depending upon the nature of the business. Those orders might be, even if they're relatively small in numbers, the orders themselves might be very complex, with lots and lots and lots of line items on them, and that can begin to burden the database as well. So as I say, this is kind of the good news, bad news. The bad news is that the system, the basic QuickBooks system, is not designed to handle that number of transaction or that complexity of transactions. But the good news is, hey, we've grown our business to a point where we're successful now, and we're seeing this. So these are all indications, though, that now is the time to evaluate whether we can continue living with the system the way it is, or whether we need to go to a more sophisticated accounting, or as we know in the industry, referred to as an ERP solution.
There's a couple of other facets I think that are appropriate. One of them, as you talked about, are these islands of information that are maybe stored in some ancillary systems. So in one recent experience, an opportunity for us to propose Dynamics 365 Business Central. They are currently using a homegrown system plus QuickBooks. So they probably have spreadsheets, they probably have QuickBooks, they probably have some number of homegrown systems to support the manufacturing process. So these all kind of represent islands of information, as you mentioned earlier. I think that one of the opportunities, say, to go to an ERP system is to encompass all of that activity into one application. So that way the database is unified in the sense that all of the information for all the systems is accessible to all the modules of the software. That gives you that one view, if you will, using some business intelligence tool like Microsoft Power BI to be able to access any portion of the operational data and to make some good decisions. So in this particular instance, I asked the question, so why not just stay with what you have? So this combination of QuickBooks, spreadsheets, and homegrown systems. And their answer to me, I think, was poignant. And it took them a little while to come to this in that discussion. But the answer was, we need the visibility to make good decisions. So while the manufacturing process might be efficient using these homegrown systems because they were tailored just for their business processes the way they are today, they're not good sources of data. So having some good information, I guess the adage is you can't improve what you can't measure. So kind of gives them the impetus to get that information, look at the data, and then make decisions about capacity or utilization or sequencing of the production orders. So that I think is a pretty critical advantage for having an ERP system in place. The other piece that occurs to me in our discussion is that these systems that they currently have today are most certainly on-premises systems. So as you know, lots of drawbacks to having on-premises systems, including disaster recovery and theft and physical security. Having some of these systems in the cloud, Business Central, for example, gives people access remotely. So they don't necessarily have to be in the office. They can be elsewhere and still have access to all the important data they need for decision making or getting an order through quickly. Catering to a priority customer. So are those things relevant?
Absolutely. There has been a shift to cloud-based solutions for a lot of reasons in organizations today. First off, you pointed out security. There was long a belief, I think, especially in small businesses, maybe a combination of belief. One was that if I have something sitting on my computer, it's more secure than it is in the cloud. And we can touch on that and talk about why that's completely wrong, but it is definitely an incorrect perspective. And we've seen, a lot of examples around that. Another was, well, if I'm a small business, I'm not really at risk because nobody cares about my small little business. But we know, and there's an just a tremendous amount of, whether it's, FBI data, all kinds of law enforcement data now that shows us that in fact small businesses are much more often the target of data breaches, of fraud, and the reality is that, quite frankly, that happens for a relatively small handful of reasons. One is people who are trying to damage those small businesses recognize that the small businesses don't have the access to the resources that large businesses do. So they're just inherently not as secure at a starting point level. They don't have the processes in place also in many cases to deal with those situations. I think you might remember a scenario where we were doing a presentation. I remember this story, and I've shared this subsequently, but it was a small mother and daughter business. They were selling hair care products, and they had an online store as well as 2 kiosks in a couple of shopping malls. And they were breached. The hackers were really smart, and this is what we see in today's world, is that the hackers are really smart. This is a business for them. And what they did in that case was they breached the online store of the mother and daughter business. And they didn't change anything. Or I shouldn't say they didn't take anything. What they did was they went into the banking routing instructions for the dollars that were flowing through their online e-commerce system. Actually, it wasn't it was an e-commerce system. I don't think it was online. And they simply changed the routing instructions so that the money would go not into the mother and daughter's bank account, but would go into the hacker's bank account. And they didn't catch it. The mother and daughter didn't catch it. There was about $20,000 worth of orders that had been placed. And all of a sudden they started looking at their bank account, trying to figure out why they couldn't find this $20,000. And subsequently, with some investigation, it was realized what had happened. And they filed a claim with the police department, and I think it went to the FBI. But the reality is that the money was long gone. They had shipped the products, and the orders were legitimate orders. They weren't fraudulent orders. There were people who were. It's just simply that once the money had been taken for the placement of those orders, instead of putting that money in the mother and daughter's bank account, it went into the criminal bank account. And that's a perfect example of the challenge that we see in today's world. Is the criminals are very, very smart, and a lot of us as business owners have to really think about how we become at least as smart around some of our own internal processes and our own security. Cloud-based solutions are, as I said before, inherently more secure because you have multiple layers of security around the data centers, around the data itself. If they are correctly implemented and configured, they're relying on authentication technologies so that when you log into them, we're validating not just maybe a user ID and password, but we're using some kind of multi-factor authentication. A text message is probably the most common example of that, although there are certainly other, and I would argue better types of authentication that can be used. But at a minimum, you're doing something along those lines, and we see that very commonly with cloud-based solutions. The other big advantage to cloud-based solutions that we recognize in this world, and I think we've seen a lot of that this past year with COVID, has been the reality that we aren't just working in office spaces anymore. We are working remotely. Maybe our entire team is working remotely. We're working on mobile devices, and I need to be able to have access to information on a real-time basis, and I need to have access to that information on a mobile device. I need to be able to, I need to be able to open up my cell phone, and I need to be able to look and see, what do I have in the way of receivables? What's our current cash position if I'm a business owner? I'm not just, I don't want to have to just, go into the office to get access to that information. And so that's another beauty of cloud-based solutions, is it's that availability of access to information on anytime, anywhere, from virtually any device.
All right, Eric, thank you for the help. I think this will do it for our segment about Outgrowing QuickBooks. My name is Brian Iinuma, Company Strategic Systems Group. My friend and colleague, Mr. Eric Klauss, CEO of PartnerSource Solutions. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.